to inspire you along the way.
Yes.
Please listen to Pearl One Drop One by Neville Raper.
Roland and Susan had been married for over 40 years. They'd met in their teens in the local shoe factory. Roland was in high heels, Susan in soft leather. It wasn't a heated affair, but they both knew they were soulmates. Within the year, they tied the knot. After scrimping and saving, they managed to buy their first home on Alpine Road. It was named this due to its steep incline. It was built on the side of an old disused pit, a cul-de-sac that looked more of a ski jump than a street. Their road ran straight to the main one below, and beyond it, the canal that in the past would have been used to transport coal around the power-hungry country. Obviously, because of a government who used their dislike of unions to make money on cut-price imported coal, this was, just like the miners, long since redundant. Roland and Susan loved their little home, so much that they never moved again. Well, Roland didn't. More of that later on. They'd got to that comfortable part of their marriage, where they didn't really talk. To be fair, there was nothing left to say after 50 years. Susan had the sofa, Roland had his chair, territory marked out by newspapers and knitting needles. And, in the middle of them both, Stanley the dog. Stanley was a crossbreed mutt, part Jack Russell, part Yorkshire Terrier, part Piranha. He spent most of his time hopping from lap to lap, a timeshare dog. Stanley had a fairly simple life. Eat, drink, sleep, fart, and not necessarily in that order. I suppose he was their surrogate child. If so, he was a daddy's dog. So they plodded on with their lives, days measured out in tea bags and biscuits. The staccato rattle of Susan's knitting needle was the backbeat of their relationship. Everything was fine in Roland's world as he slowly wended his way to the grave. Well, it was until Susan moved in with Mr. Moss at number 78. Trevor Moss had dyed hair and drove a convertible. His wife had passed away a couple of years ago. Since then he'd reinvented himself. He'd drive up and down their steep hill every day with his roof down, rain or shine, and wave to all the neighbours as he did. He was the talk of the great grey wave of Alpine Road. Roland hated him. At first he was unaware of the attraction between Mr. Moss and Susan, although he did start to suspect when he noticed how his wife would drop a stitch whenever she heard his car. She would jump up to the window and wave, just like the majority of her female neighbours. Roland never liked a fuss, so would just pet Stanley and go back to his paper. Susan's sighs often made him lose his place. One Monday, Susan appeared in the living room with her suitcase and informed him she was leaving. "For how long?" he asked. "Forever," she responded. She moved in with Mr. Moss, and Roland never said a word. Now, don't get me wrong, Roland was incandescent with rage, but it's hard to jump up and down in carpet slippers. Eventually he swallowed his anger, but just like a little acorn, it grew and grew within Roland's guts. Stanley now took Susan's place on the sofa. Same amount of conversation, less knitting. Now Trevor and Susan paraded up and down the road every day in that bloody convertible. They always paused and, to no doubt rub salt in his wounds, wave at Roland. You see, just like his now ex-wife, he too had become obsessed by that drive-by. Every night before bed, he took Stanley out for his last pee of the day. They normally went down the road and had 5 minutes by the canal. Roland always found it peaceful, looking into the deep, cold grey water. But now he decided to go up the hill to number 78. As Stanley cocked his leg, he'd peep through the chink in the curtains, like an OA pervert. He'd often see the adulterous couple curled up together on the sofa, drinking cheap wine and laughing. It seemed Susan had abandoned her knitting. One night, Stanley did his evening pee on Trevor's convertible. Roland made a fuss of the dog. "Good boy," he said as he ruffled his fur. The following night, Roland put some biscuits in his coat pocket. When the dog cocked his leg on the front wheel, he gave Stanley a reward. This routine went on for days, weeks, months. If nothing else, Roland was a patient man. It was a Wednesday afternoon in April when it finally happened. An overcast, fairly cold spring day, but as usual the car roof was down. Roland heard the car before he saw it. Trevor and Susan with their habitual royal parade coming down the steep hill. He stood up to watch them pass. On seeing him, Trevor smiled, a smug, denture-filled grin. This very quickly disappeared as he tried to slow down so Roland could get a good look at them. In fact, the smile dropped completely as he tried to apply the brake. The car, instead of slowing down, actually built up speed down the hill. The last Roland ever saw of his ex-wife and the old dyed-haired philanderer was as their car disappeared under the freezing water of that old canal. You see, dog's pee is highly corrosive, and brake pipes can be oh so fragile. Roland made sure that Stanley had an extra portion of meaty chunks that night, and, as an extra treat, he let the dog sleep on Susan's knitting.
Wow, that was Per One Drop One by Neville Raper.
I mean, I've never heard so many knitting references in one.
Absolutely.
I was wondering